The dog refuses to leave a grave. When the police opened the grave, they were horrified to see what was inside. In the silence of the cemetery or garden of the Los Angeles, where the pencils seemed to tell stories of lives that had gone, a dog named Apollo caught everyone's attention. It was not just any dog. Apollo had something special. Day and night, he stayed next to a grave, as if he were keeping something very valuable. The inhabitants began to notice it and wondered, why was he not moving away from there? Apollo did not let anyone get too close to that grave. If someone tried to, he was softly grunting as if saying, "Don't cross this line." The most curious thing was that it was Samuel's grave, a young man that everyone thought was dead in a fire. But Apollo's determined attitude aroused concern in people. He will be waiting for his owner to return. This question filled the hearts of many. The children of the town began to visit the cemetery just to see the dog. Some even brought him food and water. Apollo accepted, but never moved away from the grave. It was as if he was fulfilling a mission. It was then that the mystery began to grow. After all, what made that dog protect so much a place where, in theory, there were only memories? The adults, on the other hand, were intrigued. Some thought that Apollo's behavior was just loyalty. Dogs are like that, right? They miss their owners and wait for them, even if they never come back. But at the same time, something did not fit. It was as if Apollo knew something that no one else knew. And then the question grew even more. Did that grave hide any secret? The dog knew the answer, but how to understand what he was trying to communicate? Meanwhile, Apollo remained there, firm, as if nothing in the world could separate him from that place. It was impossible not to ask, what was he protecting? Days passed, and Apollo's behavior continued to intrigue the inhabitants of the Garden of the Angels. What seemed to be just a curious case became the topic of conversation of the whole town. It was as if that dog was trying to tell something that no one could understand. In the face of so many unanswered questions, someone decided it was time to call the police. When the investigators arrived at the cemetery, they were impressed. Apollo did not move from the place and seemed more determined than ever. Sergeant Oliveira, an experienced and skeptical man. He thought it would only be another of those exaggerated stories of a small town. He tried to approach the grave to investigate, but Apollo intervened, showing his teeth, saying, "Don't even think about it." It took a lot of patience and a few pieces of meat to gain the dog's trust. Finally, very carefully, the police managed to move Apollo a few meters from the grave. He grinned down, restless, and although he ate the pieces of meat, he didn't look away from what the men were doing. He seemed to know that something important was about to happen. Sergeant Oliveira, with years of experience in service, breathed deeply before giving the order to open the grave. He didn't expect to find anything special, but he had a strange feeling, something that stirred his stomach. With a special tool, one of the policemen slowly lifted the coffin lid. The silence took over the cemetery. Not even the wind seemed to dare to blow at that moment. When the lid was removed, everyone bowed to look inside. But what they found was nothing. The coffin was empty. How empty? "This makes no sense," exclaimed Sergeant Oliveira, breaking the silence with incredible in his voice. He took a step back, took off his hat, and scratched his head, as if seeking a logical explanation. His eyes looked back at the coffin, as if they were waiting for Samuel's body to magically appear. The murmur began among the inhabitants who watched from afar. "Is it empty? How could it be?" whispered an elderly woman squeezing her husband's arm. "Is this some kind of joke?" asked another with a frown. People looked at each other not knowing what to think. The mystery only grew. Meanwhile, Apollo began to bark loudly as if to say, "I warned them." He was pulling on the makeshift leash so hard that he seemed about to break loose and run back to the grave. The policeman holding him looked at the sergeant not knowing what to do. "Oliveira, what is the meaning of this?" asked one of the agents, clearly uncomfortable. The sergeant took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure, but it was evident that he had no answers either. "It means we have a much bigger problem than we imagined," Oliveira replied with a firm voice, but a confused mind. He bent down to look inside the empty coffin once more, as if some invisible clue might emerge. Nothing, just emptiness, laden with mystery. A mystery so great that he left everyone with a knot in their throat and a feeling that something even stranger was about to happen. Before continuing, remember to leave your like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and their exciting stories. The revelation that Samuel's coffin was empty left the whole city in shock. But for the investigators, this was just the beginning of a day that he promised to be full of unexpected twists. Sergeant Oliveira, a practical and direct man, knew that something was very wrong. There is no mystery without reason. Someone knows what's going on, and we're going to find out, he said with conviction, as the neighbors continued to murmur around him. The investigation began to deepen, and the first clues began to emerge. One of the police officers found, in Samuel's old room, in the house of his family, a drawer full of wrinkled papers. Among notes and confusing messages, something caught the attention. A series of threatening letters written by hand, with phrases like, "You saw what you shouldn't have and keep quiet or you will be the next." The officer's heart accelerated when he saw them. He immediately took the letters to Sergeant Oliveira, who analyzed them with a serious look. "This changes everything," said the sergeant, holding one of the papers. If Samuel was receiving these threats before his supposed death, maybe he didn't die by accident. Maybe they silenced him, or worse. Meanwhile, Clara, Samuel's mother, was called to help in the investigation. When he saw the letters, he became pale and covered his mouth with his hands, trying to contain the tears. He didn't know. "My God, I had no idea they were threatening him," he said, with tears rolling down his face. The guilt hit him like a punch in the stomach. "Should I have noticed? I should have asked more. Maybe I was trying to protect myself." With more information in the hands of the investigators, they began to rebuild Samuel's last days before the fire. They discovered that he had worked in a warehouse in the center of the town and that, shortly before disappearing, he had witnessed something dangerous. An illegal negotiation between members of a criminal group operating in the region. Samuel was not part of the scheme, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that changed his life forever. One of Samuel's friends, Pedro, was called to testify. He was visibly nervous, with his hands sweating as he spoke. "Samuel told me he had seen something he shouldn't have. He was scared, you know? He said he couldn't give me details, but he knew they were following him," Pedro confessed. "I told him to go to the police, but he replied that that would only make things worse." With each testimony, the situation became clearer and more dangerous. Samuel was being threatened because he knew too much. He knew enough to send those criminals to jail, but at the same time, was completely alone, trying to deal with the fear and pressure of protecting his own life. While all this was happening, Apollo was still a central figure in the case. The dog seemed to feel that things were moving, that humans were finally starting to understand. He kept alert, accompanying the police in the searches, as if he wanted to help. In a way he did. Apollo's presence reminded everyone that Samuel still needed to be found. The mystery was no longer just about an empty coffin. Now, it was about saving Samuel, who could be alive, but in danger. Sergeant Oliveira, more determined than ever, called a special team to continue the search. He knew that every lost minute could be fatal. The tension increased with each discovery, and the inhabitants, previously curious, were now scared. And if the same who threatened Samuel came for someone else, they asked each other. Clara, on her part, was desperate. "I just want my son to come back," she said in a daze. The pain of not knowing if he was alive or dead was unbearable. Meanwhile, Bernardo, Samuel's father, remained silent and distant. There was something in his eyes that the police could not ignore, a mixture of guilt and concern. But nobody knew yet what he was hiding. Thus, the drama and mystery deepened. But the puzzle was far from being solved. What nobody knew was that the answers were closer than they imagined, hidden in a secret that would change everyone's life forever. Samuel's family's tension in the house was almost palpable. Every new discovery made Clara, the most devastated mother, but there was someone there who seemed to carry an even heavier weight. Bernardo, Samuel's father. Always quiet, with a fixed gaze on the ground. He seemed to try to hide from everything that was happening, but he couldn't pretend anymore. His silence wasn't just sadness. It was guilt. After a sleepless night, Clara finally lost her patience. She entered the room where Bernardo was sitting, holding one of Samuel's old toys. His face was tired, full of wrinkles that seemed deeper than ever. "Bernardo, you know something, right? Are you hiding something from me?" His voice trembled. Not anger, but pain. It was the pain of a mother who could no longer bear to carry on with so many questions without an answer. Bernardo took too long to answer. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, as if he were gathering all the courage he had. "Clara, I don't know how to start," he said with a low voice, almost whispering. "But you're right. I know. I know what happened to Samuel." Those words were like a blow to Clara's stomach. She was paralyzed for a moment, without being able to believe what he had just heard. "How do you know? You knew all this time and you didn't tell me." His voice rose, mixing sadness and indignation. Bernardo couldn't look at her. He knew that the following words would change everything. "I did it to protect him." He began with tears filling his eyes. Samuel was in danger. Those people whom he saw doing illegal things threatened him. They said they would kill him, Clara. Clara went back a step, trying to process what she had just heard. "You faked her death? That's what you did. You made me believe that our son was dead, that he had been buried in that empty coffin." The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. "I had no other option," Bernardo replied, with a broken voice. "They were looking for him. They were going to kill him if they found out where he was. I thought the only way to keep him safe was to make everyone believe that he was dead. Even you, Claire. Was the only way to protect you too." Clara didn't know if she felt anger or relief. On the one hand, she was furious because Bernardo had made such a drastic decision without consulting her. On the other hand, there was a spark of hope burning her heart. If what she said was true, Samuel was still alive. "And where is he now?" she asked, trying to hold back her tears. "Where did you hide him?" "Bernardo." Bernardo looked at her, and Clara saw the pain and regret in his face. "I took him to a safe place, far from here. I didn't tell you because I knew that, if you knew, you would want to bring him back. But we couldn't take that risk. They were watching Clara. They were ready to attack." Clara felt that her legs were weakening and she had to sit down. The weight of that revelation was overwhelming. For months, she had cried the death of Samuel, thinking that she would never come back. And now, discovering that everything had been a lie told out of love, but still a lie, was almost impossible to bear. "You should have trusted me," Clara said in a daze. "We could have faced this together. I am your mother, Bernardo. I had the right to know." Bernardo knelt next to her, holding her hands tightly. "I know I was wrong, Clara. I know I should have told you, but I was desperate. I just wanted to protect our son. And now I'm asking you for help, because I can't take this on my own anymore." Clara's heart was broken. She wanted to scream, cry, hit Bernardo for hiding something so important. But above all, she wanted to see her son again. She wanted to hug him, tell him she loved him and make sure he was safe. Even if that meant facing all the fears and dangers that Bernardo tried to avoid. Bernardo's confession changed everything. The mystery was no longer just about an empty coffin, but about a family divided by fear and love. Now, Clara knew she would do whatever it took to bring Samuel back home. Although the road was full of obstacles, she was ready. After all, that was the love of a mother. After the devastating revelation of Bernardo, there was no time to lose. Sergeant Oliveira gathered his team to develop a detailed rescue plan. Finally, the place where Samuel was hiding was revealed. A house in a rural area surrounded by dense forest. A place that seemed safe, but that, according to Bernardo, began to attract the attention of the criminals. "I did my best to keep him safe, but I can no longer protect our son alone," he said with a broken voice. Clara insisted on accompanying the team, but she was convinced of staying behind. "Leave this to us," said the sergeant, looking into her eyes. "We will bring your son back. I promise you." Despite his resistance, Clara felt, holding a rosary in her hands, as if her life depended on it. The police team left at dawn. The journey to the house was complicated, with paths full of potholes and difficult paths to cross. Apollo, who seemed to understand that something important was happening, was taken along with the team. He was restless, with an attentive gaze, as if he were ready to act at any moment. "This dog is incredible," one of the policemen commented. "He seems to know exactly what is at stake." When they finally arrived at the house, Sergeant Oliveira ordered that everyone be careful. "We do not know if we are being watched," he warned. "We must be quick and discreet." The silence was deafening as the policemen scattered around the perimeter, with weapons in hand and eyes alert. He knocked on the door with a sequence of touches previously agreed with Samuel. For a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. But then the door opened slowly, revealing Samuel. He was visibly weakened, with deep eyes and a thin body. But he was alive. "That?" Samuel said in a weak voice, looking at Bernardo and then at the police. "What's going on? Why did they come?" Bernardo ran to hug him, holding his son as if he never wanted to let him go. "Now you are safe, son. Everything is fine," he said with tears in his eyes. Apollo, who had been calm until then with the sergeant, seemed to feel that this was the moment he had been waiting for. With a pulse full of energy, he let go of the strap and ran towards Samuel like an arrow. The sound of his feet hitting the ground resonated in the air, and Samuel, when he heard the noise, turned quickly. "Your eyes filled with tears when you saw that familiar dog," and ran towards him. "Apollo," Samuel shouted with a trembling voice of emotion as he opened his arms. Before he could say anything else, Apollo had already jumped on him, knocking him down to the ground with so much enthusiasm. The dog licked his face non-stop, as if trying to compensate for every second that passed by. His tail moved so fast that it looked like a fan, and he let out small whispers of happiness as if saying, "I knew you were here, I knew I would find you." Samuel could not contain his laughter, but it was a different laughter, loaded with relief and love. It was the first time in months that he really smiled. "Apollo, you are here too," he repeated, caressing the soft fur of the dog that did not stop jumping and licking his tears, as if saying, "I never abandoned you." The policemen around stopped for a moment to watch the scene. Even Sergeant Oliveira, known for being hard, had eyes full of tears. "This dog is a true hero," he murmured, crossing his arms and smothering a little smile. Samuel held Apollo's face with both hands and supported his forehead on the dog's. "I missed you so much, my friend," he whispered as tears ran down his face. Apollo seemed to understand every word. He sat next to Samuel, but without taking his gaze away, as if he were saying, "I will never leave you alone again." The moment was so intense that it seemed that the world around had stopped. Nothing else mattered, nor the dangers that could still be close, nor the fact that the struggle to keep Samuel safe was far from over. At that moment, everything that existed was the reunion of two friends who never surrendered one to the other. Finally, the rescue was a success, but the danger was far from over. Everyone knew that Samuel's return to town would raise questions and, possibly, would revive the interest of criminals. However, for now, the priority was to ensure that he was safe and that his family could embrace him again. When the police car arrived at the family house, Clara was already waiting at the entrance, with her heart racing. The vehicle barely stopped, and she was already running towards him. When the door opened and Samuel left, she stopped for a moment, as if she needed to confirm that it was not a dream. Samuel screamed, and he looked at her with tears in his eyes. Samuel ran towards Clara and both hugged each other so strongly that it looked like the whole world had disappeared. Clara cried, holding her son's face as if she wanted to memorize every detail. "My boy, you're here, you're alive." He repeated these words between the two of them, while Samuel tried to hold back his tears. Bernardo, who had just got out of the car. I knew he had made difficult decisions, but at that moment, everything seemed worth it. Apollo, on the other hand, did not stay out of it. He approached Samuel and Clara, moving their tails and licking them, as if he wanted to participate in that moment of joy. "I thought I would never see you again," Clara said, still holding Samuel as if he could disappear at any moment. "I missed you so much," Samuel, now crying, replied, "I missed you too, Mom. Every day." The reunion was so emotional that even the police had their eyes full of tears. Sergeant Oliveira, who had seen everything in his career, breathed deeply, trying to maintain composure. "Mission accomplished," he said in a low voice for himself. But not everything was tears of joy. Clara, with a relieved heart for having Samuel back, also felt the need to understand everything that had happened. She looked at Bernardo, and his gaze said it all. We still have a lot to talk about. For now, the family was reunited, and that moment was just theirs. But Clara knew that rebuilding trust, love, and the feeling of security would be a challenge. Meanwhile, Apollo, the hero of 4 legs, did not separate from Samuel's side. It seemed that, despite the reunion, the story was still far from ending. And in that strong hug between mother and son, it was clear that no distance, no danger, and no lie would be greater than the love that united that family. After Samuel's exciting rescue, the family finally reunited, but the initial joy soon gave way to deep tensions. Clara, devastated after months believing in the death of her son, confronted Bernardo. His confession of having faked Samuel's death to protect him was received with a mixture of anger and pain. Bernardo explained that his decision was driven by fear and love. But that did not alleviate Clara's suffering. She felt betrayed and did not know if she could forgive him so soon. However, both agreed that they needed to focus on Samuel's future now that he was back home. Meanwhile, Apollo stood out as the true hero of the story. His unbreakable loyalty led the authorities to discover that Samuel was alive, saving him from a deadly threat. The dog, who never left the place where he believed Samuel was celebrated by the community as an example of unconditional love. Children and neighbors gathered to pay tribute to Apollo, highlighting the vital role he played in reuniting the family again. With Samuel on his way back, the family reconstruction began. Clara promised that, despite emotional scars, she would rebuild her relationship based on love and honesty. Samuel, still fragile, expressed his gratitude to Apollo, reaffirming the special bond he had with his faithful companion. Bernardo, on the other hand, recognized his mistakes and committed to recovering the trust of his family, willing to do everything necessary to correct the past. Samuel's return gave the family the opportunity for a new beginning. United by love and guided by the courage of Apollo, they understood that, even if the road was full of challenges, together they could overcome any adversity. The story, full of pain, redemption, and hope. It became a symbol for the community that even the most difficult situations can be overcome when there is loyalty, love, and determination. Thanks for watching the video until the end. Remember to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your opinion on this story.